Hi, you're listening to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast produced by the Get Global Network. Hi, and welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. Thank you for subscribing to my podcast, and be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, SGT, the abbreviation for Sergeant, SGT Cheryl Dorsey on Instagram and Twitter, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel, SGT Dorsey Speaks, much like my podcast. I'm a retired 20-year veteran sergeant in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I'll be providing you with an insider's perspective on police policy, police culture, and police training. I'll pull the covers back, expose that thin blue line, and decipher police code talk when we hear it. I'll also be discussing incidents that are making national headlines and how you might get involved and engaged in your particular communities. Also, I'll be offering solutions on how best to survive police encounters, because at the end of the day, the goal is for everyone to go home safe. For more about me and my career, visit my website, www.sgtcheryldorsey.com, for information about my advocacy work, as well as my 20-year career, which is chronicled in my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. I talk about in great detail my 20-year career on the LAPD, where I worked in patrol my entire career under the command of police chiefs Daryl Francis Gates, Willie Williams, and Bernard Parks. I talk about real life encounters and adventures, if you will, during my 20-year career. I name names in some instances, and in others I use pseudonyms and aliases that I like to give folks. You'll be able to tell exactly who it is that I'm talking about based on the circumstances when I use an alias. And for those of you who'd like a sneak peek, on my website, www.sgtcheryldorsey.com, you can read the first chapter of Volume 2, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, as well as my next to be released book, Volume 3 in the Black and Blue series, Black and Blue, Creation of a Whistleblower. Let's get to it. So, this is a really important podcast for me because Sergeant Dorsey Speaks has reached a milestone, family. This is actually my 100th podcast. And so for that, I want to say two things. I'm really excited to have reached this milestone because let me just share a little secret with you. When I first was contacted by someone, my amazing podcast producer, about even doing a podcast, and we talked about, let's do, maybe 15 minutes, give it a name that has something to do with 15 minutes. And my response was, are you kidding me? I can't talk for 15 minutes, a whole 15 minutes. And so it took about a year before I was able to be convinced that, number one, I could speak for longer than 15 minutes. And number two, anybody would care. And so I'm excited to be doing for you today my 100th podcast. And I'm also equally excited and thankful and appreciative for all of you who have subscribed to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, who have told a friend, who have downloaded, who have shared. I appreciate you. And I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And so this show is, I'm feeling a little feisty today, family. Let me just start off and say that. I talked last week on my podcast, and so I need to make a little correction. I've actually done some edits, and some of this stuff has already been corrected. But for those of you who may have already downloaded last week's podcast number 99, you may hear some misinformation. And so I wanted to set the record straight. I talked about an LAPD officer by the name of Toni McBride, who is the daughter of an LAPD detective who is also a Los Angeles Police Protective League director. And his name is Jaime McBride. I misspoke when I said that Toni McBride was the daughter of the LAPPL president. Now, the LAPPL president is actually Craig Lawley. I'll talk a little bit more about Craig and his vice president, Joetta Santos, in a minute. But what I know now to be true and correct is that Toni McBride, the young P2 officer who works Newton Area Division, was involved in a fatal shooting a few days ago of a young man who's now been identified as Daniel Hernandez. Daniel Hernandez was involved in a traffic accident, and he stepped out of his vehicle with a box cutter in his hand and was shot 6 times by Toni McBride. And what makes that kind of important, if you will, is when you know the history of Toni's father. Jaime McBride. So I'll talk a little bit about both. And I also now know, because it's being reported and I've been able to see this for myself. Toni McBride joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 2017. So with that as a backdrop, let me just kind of go back and start at the beginning. Los Angeles Police Protective League, that is our version of a union. It's also known by its initials, LAPPL. And the president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League right now is a LAPD officer by the name of Craig Lawley, Lally. And so this, like everything else that I share with you, is out there and easily verifiable. I always say when I say something, don't necessarily take my word. Do your own due diligence and find out for yourself about the veracity of whatever it is that I'm sharing with you. I think it's just good practice to know for yourself. So Craig Lawley is the current president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, our union. Now, let me tell you who Craig Lawley is, because listen, LAPD union, much like every other fraternal order of police, benevolent patrol officers association, benevolent sergeants association, detective endowment association, those are the ones over on the NYPD that represents their rank and file. All of these police unions, in my opinion, would seem to almost require, in order to be a president, and in this case, a director like Jaime McBride. Well, first of all, you got to be what I refer to as a Billy Badass. And you know what I mean by Billy Badass. That's that guy or girl sometimes who probably used to get their ass kicked every morning on the way to school. And it wasn't until they became a police officer that all of a sudden they were somebody. And even when they go home, now that they're a police officer, I work with these guys and I know this to be true. They don't get any respect at home from their wives who are civilians. So when they come to work, you know, they're Billy Badass and they like to treat people any kind of way and talk to folks any kind of way. You've seen them time and time again when videos go viral and you see a police officer doing something that he would never have the intestinal fortitude to do if he wasn't wearing a gun and badge. So you already know who Billy Badass is. Craig Lawley. I think he's Billy Badass. And the reason that I say that is because Craig Lawley is identified as, and I'm air quotes, a problem officer on the Christopher Commission. The Christopher Commission proposed reforms in the wake of the 1991 police beating of Rodney King. Now, back then, they used to have a list that officers were on, kind of like the list that little Tink Tink was talking about creating. I told you he didn't know what he was talking about, and he was being disingenuous when he was pretending he was coming up with some new police reform that was going to somehow make a difference. Police departments have always had lists. We don't need a national list. LAPD had a list, and that was where all of the problem officers, air quote, problem officers like Craig Lawley landed. Folks who were involved in unnecessary uses of force were flagged by the Christopher Commission, and it illustrated that these were officers who had a problem using excessive force on the LAPD. Well, that was Craig Lawley. So listen, he lived not only to offend again, because he was involved in many what were believed to be problem excessive uses of force, he lived to go on to protect others who were, air quote, problem officers by becoming the president of our police union. And so this guy, Jaime McBride, he's a 30-year veteran on the Los Angeles Police Department. He has been a Los Angeles Police Protective League director for about 6 years, according to an article that I'm quoting right now. And, you know, our union is very powerful like others around the country. And it's because these unions, our Police Protective League, uses campaign donations to influence city officials. Not only does our Police Protective League use campaign donations to influence city officials, when you have a guy like Jaime McBride, who's their mouthpiece, he's our Pat Lynch. He is the one who's often in front of the news media to speak on behalf of the rank and file officers. And he did so very recently, and it was kind of interesting. If you look at the article that's out there, it's an LA Times article, so you can certainly Google it and see what it is that I'm sharing with you. But he was involved in pretending to want to be a part of police reform here in the city of LA. On the same day that he gave this false statement, is what I'm calling it, Jaime McBride also lamented over what he thinks is certain city officials, certain LAPD administrators. Maybe he's talking about the police chief, Mike Moore, not backing the troops. It's reported about McBride this way. He's described as a street cop with a disproportionate number of on-duty shootings. And in so much as he's been involved in all of these on-duty shootings, he had issue with management's decision to discipline him. And to his credit, he fought discipline and he won. He evidently sued LAPD, fought discipline. LAPD thought at that time that his shootings were out of policy, that his tactics were poor. And he didn't agree with that, got a good attorney evidently, and fought and won. There was a 2004 article by the Times, the Los Angeles Times, where it said McBride had also been involved in many more shootings than the vast majority of other officers. He had been involved in a total of 6 shootings in his first 11 years on the LAPD. And McBride had been repeatedly, quote, repeatedly criticized for putting himself and fellow officers at risk with careless tactics, because you've heard me say before, poor tactics lead to poor shootings, unnecessary shootings, right? And so when you understand that that's who Jaime McBride is, then you'll understand, because fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, who his little spawn is, Toni McBride, the Newton area officer who shot and killed Daniel Hernandez a few days ago. There's also much being said and reported about Facebook postings and comments that were attributed to Jaime McBride. It says that late in 2008, McBride posted a video on Facebook, and there's a link that purports to send you to this Facebook video, and it shows Black and Latino suspects being body slammed, stunned with tasers, and chased down by LAPD officers. I'm still quoting. It features multiple corpses on the streets stained with blood. And the video also shows officers breaking up a fight and tending to wounded citizens. And McBride in this video is purported to have referred to this as the good old days. So those were the good old days, when you could just beat up Black and Latino folks and leave them bloodied and, laying in a puddle of their own blood, I guess, on the streets of LA. Those were the good old days, according to Jaime McBride, the director of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, father of Toni McBride. So he's one of the directors. He's not the president, but he is one of the directors, mouthpiece, spokesperson. He's the one that they trot out when they want to have someone, speak crazy talk, is what I call it, Billy Badass talk, kick ass, take names. And we don't want to hear your belly aching about, officers are being too rough with folks. That's who Toni McBride's dad is, young Jaime. And I want to talk a little bit about the vice president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, because the vice president currently of the Police Protective League is a Black female officer by the name of Joetta Santos. And I think she holds the rank of sergeant. Now, Joetta Santos is the first Black officer to ever be appointed as a director of the Los Angeles Police Department. And so, listen, that was a big deal. Good for Joetta. Unfortunately, though, I say all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? And so you would think that being the first Black female on the Police Protective League would somehow mean that you were going to go along to get along, right? What's the point in being the first anything if you're not going to do something that's contrary to the nonsense that's been going on? But yet, she's been a good little soldier. God bless her. Joetta Santos, Sergeant Joetta Santos, I believe. And she's now the vice president. And so you understand when I say to you, I don't get excited when I see a Black police chief, and it's unfortunate that it's that way. That's how I feel. That's how I see it. Because you only get to breathe that special air if you are willing to go along to get along. I have said in my autobiography, I talked about something else that I'm going to get to in just a minute in my autobiography about some of the people that I worked with and knew and had been around on the LAPD who looked like me, but didn't talk like me. And obviously, in my opinion, don't think like me, because they wouldn't utter these words. But, you only get there if you're willing to go sit in the corner with a box of paper clips and count them. And then when you're done counting them, they'll tell you, okay, heifer, count them again. And so, I don't know because I'm not there, but I'm just thinking, and talking to some folks, there are those who would say that having the first Black female in the person of Joetta Santos really means nothing on the Los Angeles Police Department. There have been many incidents over the years since Joetta Santos has been a league director, and I ain't heard this heifer say nothing about nothing. I know that there are many officers who have angst with some internal strife regarding an LAPD officer who was shot and killed years ago. Kevin Gaines was the Black LAPD officer who was shot and killed by a white officer by the name of Frank Liga. I've talked about the Frank Liga incident. Frank Liga was ultimately, I think he retired in lieu of being fired, or maybe he was fired and then was able to get reinstated or something. There was some controversy, but what happened with Frank Liga real quick is that he was at a training day he was undercover narcotics detective, and he talked about, almost bragged about, having shot and killed Kevin Gaines. Kevin Gaines was off duty in his personal vehicle. Frank Liga was on duty but undercover because he's a drug narcotics officer for many years, and they had a road rage incident. Neither allegedly knew who the other was, but there's some discrepancies about that because some say that Liga knew exactly who Kevin Gaines was. They had actually been within close proximity to one another at some point during their LAPD career. But nonetheless, there was a road rage incident. Frank Liga wound up shooting and killing Kevin Gaines. And so there are many people on the LAPD right now, and some who have since, left, either retired, resigned, whatever, who were friends with Kevin Gaines and were bothered by the entire way that particular incident was handled. And then to hear Frank Liga in an in-service training say that if he had a chance, he'd shoot a whole truckload of them, which means a whole truckload of Kevin Gaines. Sounds like a whole truckload of Black folks is what he was saying. And guess what? The Los Angeles Police Protective League, they supported Frank Liga and that BS. And I believe, if my math is right, that Joetta Santos was then on the Police Protective League as a director. Didn't have nothing to say. LA Police Protective League hasn't written a letter in opposition to anything white officers have done to Black folks in Joetta Santos' tenure as a director on the Los Angeles Police Protective League. So again, back to my original point, all skin folk and kinfolk, and having the first Black female sit there and occupy space and act like you're scared to say something, I find it offensive. But listen, I am not personally bothered or mad at anybody who chooses to take the path of least resistance. If that works for you, Miss Santos, it works for me. I'm just not built that way. And, thank God for DLs. My LAPD family knows what I'm talking about. So then that brings me to my next all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Again, I've talked about this heifer in my autobiography. I named a whole chapter after her. It's called House Negroes. Now, that wasn't the name of the chapter when I first wrote it, but my first book, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Manifesto, contained a whole lot of profanity. And so because my business manager is a very smart man, he suggested that I kind of bring it down to a low roar, take out some of the profanity, or better yet, take it all out and clean it up and make it suitable for the babies and Mother Jones, in case she wanted to pick up my book and read it. So I changed the title to House Negroes. But I was talking about Amata Reed, and it's very clear that I was talking about her because I spoke specifically to an incident back in 2013 when LAPD was hunting for LAPD officer Christopher Dorner, who had been fired. And let me say this again, I don't condone murder. I don't condone what Christopher Dorner did, but I understood how he got pushed to a point where he did the unthinkable. And so at that time, Charlie Beck, who was then the police chief, brought out Amata Reed, who, by the way, is married to a white man, a former LAPD officer. He was a deputy chief. I'm told he just retired, I think, about a year ago. He ultimately rose to the rank of deputy chief, and his name is Filton Garrigues. Now, Filton Garrigues was reportedly the captain at the time that Christopher Dorner was sent to a board of rights. And so Christopher Dorner had angst with Filton Garrigues and was purported to be headed to his house when he got into that first shooting with some LAPD officers who were in Corona, California, guarding Garrigues' home. Well, Garrigues is married to this black woman, Amata. Okay, so Amata was propped up in uniform, because you can only do that in uniform. At that time, she was a sergeant, and she was propped up by Charlie Beck, and she stood in front of a bank of cameras and said, LAPD is not racist. She said there is no racism at all on the Los Angeles Police Department. And so it was at that point that I had to stop where I was in my book and then devote an entire chapter to the House Negroes. Because listen, this heifer may not have seen any racism on the Los Angeles Police Department during her tenure when she said that back in 2013. And if she would have said, I personally haven't seen it, that probably would have been more palatable than to have her say that it doesn't exist at all, no way, no how. And so I had to just stop in my tracks, back up, and deal with that. And so listen, I believe then and I believe now that, you know, when you are a good soldier, you are rewarded. And so at that time, Amata was just a sergeant, and she has since 2013 and her whole "there is no racism on the LAPD" been promoted, as was her husband, Filton Garrigues, who was a captain at that time. And remember, he was the captain who, I'm assuming, according to rumor control, was the chairman of the Board of Rights that ultimately fired Christopher Dorner. And that's who Christopher Dorner was headed to. He was heading to their house when this whole thing went really crazy. Now, that was after he had already shot and killed the daughter of an LAPD captain, Randy Quan. Randy Quan was the person who acted as Christopher Dorner's defense attorney, if you will, during that whole administrative hearing, that Board of Rights. And again, I don't know Christopher Dorner. I ain't never seen him. I ain't never had a conversation with the man. I had been long since retired before 2013, for those of you who don't know. I was long gone before that happened. But I do believe that Christopher Dorner probably felt Randy Quan was maybe being a double agent or didn't do enough to defend him during that Board of Rights, and that's why he got fired. I don't know. I'm just surmising. But nonetheless, since that time, since that Board of Rights in 2013, Filton Garrigues, who was a captain, was promoted several times, ultimately to deputy chief. And I'm told he just retired about a year ago as a deputy chief. Well, guess what? Little Amata, because she was a good soldier, was promoted from sergeant to captain. Now, she was just reportedly promoted to captain very recently. She was a captain 1, which means she's a baby captain. You know, that's kind of the worst captain position to have as a captain 1, because you're a patrol captain. Means you're responsible typically for a patrol division, unless you're working some coveted assignment where they put captain 1s. Again, those who breathe that special air get the homie hookup. So Amata was a captain 1, and she has, I heard as of last week, been promoted from captain 1. Now listen, after captain 1, there's captain 2 and captain 3. This heifer was able to bystep captain 2 and 3, and she was just promoted to a deputy chief. And so there's a whole lot of folks, black and white, and probably way more white folks, that are butthurt about this heifer being promoted to a deputy chief. Are you kidding me? Think of all the people who have studied and worked hard, worked their butts off, who have worked in those special coveted assignments because you were told that you need to work here and there if you want to promote to this rank and that rank, and you played by the rules. You did everything you were supposed to do. And then this heifer, because she was a good soldier, because she's married, got her cart connected to the right horse, she goes from captain 1 to deputy chief. I know for a fact there's a whole lot of folks that are upset, and I promise you that the majority of them don't look like me or Amata. I promise you that, because listen, LAPD is no different than any place else, and guys on the LAPD tend to think women are not deserving of promotions and positions and coveted assignments anyway. And so to have this black woman be promoted to deputy chief, which is an at-will position. And so I think in skipping commander and taking her right to deputy chief meant she could just be, made, right? Michael Moore, LAPD chief, just made her. He didn't have to go through any hoops. I guess there was no written, I guess there was no oral interview, there was no essay, there was no, I need a drop of blood, just heifer, I'm gonna make you. And I'm sure that this is probably going to have a boomerang effect long term, because now anytime a black female is promoted, now the question that will always beg to be answered is, was this heifer deserving? Did she put in, her time? Does she know what it is to be this before they made her a that? And listen, you do what you do. And all money ain't good money, but I understand your husband's a deputy chief and he's making a pretty good pension in retirement. You will ultimately retire as a deputy chief. And so that's a whole lot of coin right there. I get it. But I have always wanted to have the respect of my peers and my subordinates. And that was one of the reasons why it was important for me. Well, that wasn't the first reason why, because I realized when you look like me, they won't let you get those coveted assignments. They kept my ass in patrol when I was trying my level best to get out of patrol and go work in the building in Parker Center and go work press relations and all the places where, you need to be quiet and seen and not heard if you really want to work here. But I'm not built that way. So I was relegated to stay in patrol. And then I realized patrol is a good place to be. And I like being in patrol. And more importantly, I wanted to be credible and have the respect of my peers and ultimately my subordinates, because when I come up on a crime scene, I know what the F I'm talking about because I've been in patrol my entire career. And that's why right now, when you see me on TV, on CNN or MSNBC or wherever else you might see me talking, I know what I'm talking about because I spent all 20 years, 20, in an LAPD uniform, working in field services operations. And so, I don't know how Deputy Chief Amata Reed, and maybe she don't care about what people think and say, because I know when she walks into any room, when they start looking at all those little stars on her collar, they're not going to have an ounce of respect for her. But if respect is not what you want, if credibility is not a necessary component of who you are, then I'll take lots of coin for 200, Alec. And, at some point, God forbid, she's so far removed from patrol now at this point, nobody has to really worry about her showing up on a crime scene and effing it up because she don't know what the F she's doing, right? Because she ain't spent no time in patrol. She's been inside and worked here and worked there, South Bureau, in the building or wherever else she worked. Very little field time, but she's a deputy chief, and forevermore there will be black women, if there are any in the pipeline, and I'm told that LAPD is predominantly Hispanic now anyway, but if there were any black women in the pipeline or black men, white folks are going to forever look at us and think the only reason you were given that position is because of the color of your skin. And right now it's kind of seemingly, in everyone's best interest to promote a black woman. Promote a black woman on the police department, and that'll quiet the natives, right? Just put a black face. Get a black police chief over in Chicago. That'll make everybody happy. You got David Brown, who was a black police chief over in Dallas and then went on to be the police chief over in Chicago. You got a black female police chief over in Dallas, Renee Hall. So listen, all they got to do, black folks are the choice of the day, right? The soup du jour. Pick one and everybody will be quiet, except for those who know all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So congratulations, Deputy Chief Amata Reed. Good luck, sis. Back to Police Officer 2, Toni McBride. I mentioned to you that she had been involved in that fatal shooting of Daniel Hernandez a few days ago. Daniel Hernandez had the box cutter at the end of a traffic accident investigation, and he stepped out of his car, and Toni McBride fired 6 times, fatally injuring Daniel Hernandez, who's 38 years old, was 38 years old. His family is now suing the city of Los Angeles and Officer Toni McBride. And so I'm assuming, based on the strength of who she is and the fact that her father, Jaime McBride, is a Los Angeles Police Protective League director, they will get behind that shooting and they will support her mightily. Another comment that has been attributed to her father, Jaime McBride, with regards to black folks and particularly Black Lives Matter, he describes Black Lives Matter, quote, as an anti-police hate group. and a modern day Black Panther type of organization. So that's who Jaime McBride is. And, he's not alone. There are many others who think like him, who head up these police unions, who pay inordinate amounts of monies to political campaigns to gain favor, if you will, with elected officials. And that's why I think, when you talk about police reform, one of the things that should happen is that these police unions, Los Angeles Police Protective League included, should not be allowed to throw copious amounts of money at folks who are looking to run for office or who are ultimately in office looking to be reelected. Seems to me like a conflict of interest, but that's just me. Over in Colorado, I spoke about Elijah McLean, the young man who was choked as he was walking home by some police officers. And then they wound up calling paramedics who showed up and injected this young man with they're calling it a sedative, ketamine. Look it up, Ketamine. It's a damn horse. It's either a horse or dog tranquilizer. It's not a fucking sedative. And so, now the officers who were involved in that, I guess they staged a little reenactment because they thought it would be cute. So they staged a reenactment of the chokehold of Elijah McLean. And so now they've been fired. 3 officers, Jaron Jones, Erica Marrero, and Kyle Dietrich, were fired. Well, Jones resigned because I guess he read the writing on the wall and realized that they were coming for him next. So Jaron Jones resigned, but Erica Marrero and Kyle Dietrich resigned. And also Jason Rosenblatt was also fired. Now, Jason was fired because somebody, I think, sent him the picture of this reenactment, and it's out there on social media, so you can see that too. And Jason responded with a ha ha, that's a quote, ha ha, text on the photo, and so he gets to go as well. It's reported that these photos were taken on October 20th of last year, and that was about 2 months after Elijah McLean had died. No charges yet have been filed in connection with his death, but they are looking at the incident and everything that was involved in this young man being detained, choked, and ultimately injected with ketamine, a horse tranquilizer. To that end, the governor in Colorado has signed a police reform bill. Now, this police reform bill prohibits chokeholds. It says that officers can no longer shoot at fleeing suspects. And it also says that deadly force can only be used if a person's life is in imminent danger. But, that's kind of always been the rule. It's cool that the governor signed this bill, but immediate defense of life has always been policy. We have an acronym for it, IDOL, IDOL, immediate defense of life. Last resort. That means you've done everything else that there is to do. And the only thing left in order to make sure that you don't lose your life or that someone else doesn't lose their life is you use deadly force. And so, but anyway, Colorado governor signed this reform bill. No chokeholds, no shooting at fleeing suspects, and deadly force can only be used in the immediate defense of your life. Also, this bill speaks to officers being held personally liable. Now, this I like. Officers can be held personally liable for damages up to $25,000 if they are found guilty of violating an individual's civil rights. Now, I don't know if this if is a big if or just a little if, because great deference is given to what police officers say. And, the threshold with regards to civil rights is a whole lot steeper than, say a threshold for probable cause, right? I don't know if this is a big if or a little if, but I like the fact that it's there. And so as you hear me and as you have an opportunity to talk to other folks, remember this is an election year. District attorneys are up for election, re-election. Folks want to be governors and senators and presidents. Ask them about this personal liability bill that was just signed over in Colorado by their governor and see if that's something that can't be incorporated where you live. Speaks to the whole qualified immunity thing that the Supreme Court is somehow pondering. When I talk to you about, police officers and police unions. And, you've already heard me speak before about these officers who have quit outright because they don't like the fact that now they're being looked at and possibly going to be held accountable when they use deadly force or excessive force. And so you had an entire SWAT team over in Hollandale, Florida, walk off that special assignment. You had 57 officers walk off a special assignment on the Buffalo, New York Police Department, ERT, after two of their peers were arrested and charged with a felony for shoving a 75-year-old man down. You've had at least, I think, last I heard, 8 officers just outright quit on the Atlanta Police Department because they were butthurt behind Derek Chauvin and his partners holding George Floyd down for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And so you understand when you have officers who think that way and you have police unions who support that nonsense. I've been saying for the longest, it's just a few bad apples, but somebody said this the other day on my social media, and I may have to change my tune. I don't know if it's just a few bad apples anymore. You've got entire police unions who cannot be so bothered by the taking of a life of a black man, woman, or child. And so when you understand that that's the mindset that's out there of the people who are representing police officers, that's the mindset of the officers who are actually out there in the field day to day. It is what I refer to as the culture, police culture. And so you understand that this is going to be a long time being fixed. This didn't happen overnight. It's top down, police chief, police union, sheriff, commissioner, superintendent. And then there are the hordes of patrol officers who think that way. And so listen, there's not one thing that's going to fix this. It's a multifaceted approach. And, you've heard me say it before, but I'll say it again. You need to be having conversations with people and asking the tough questions. You need to be demanding accountability. You need to be responding to jury summons so you can be in that courtroom when this officer comes in and starts speaking double talk and company speak. You need to make sure you go to the ballot box and vote. Make sure you remove people from office who don't value the things that are important to you, the quality of life issues. And you need to get on these police departments because part of the change is going to come from the inside. You can't stop an officer like Aaron Dean from shooting a Tatiana Jefferson inside her home if you're not on that police department. You can't prevent the officers who barged in on Breonna Taylor as she slept in her home and fired 22 rounds into her home, killing her, if you're not on the police department. You can't stop a Derek Chauvin who sat on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds if you're not partnered with him. You can't stop a Garrett Wolf who shot Rayshard Brooks in the back as he ran away if you're not partnered with him. And so I think it would have been amazing to have someone who looks like me, talks like me, thinks like me with any one of those officers, because I promise you, I would have said, dude, put the gun up, get up off his neck. Don't shoot him. Don't shoot into the house. What's your hurry? What's the urgency? But when you're not there, you can't affect that kind of change. And so I say, and I know that it's not easy because I've talked to young people who are trying to get on the police department and they ask you ridiculous questions. They put you through all kinds of hoops that you're required to jump through in a background investigation. But we have to be diligent and we have to continue to persist and try as best you can to get on these police departments. So that's that. You guys probably saw the video of the white couple who had pointed, it was a white woman in particular, but she jumped in a little SUV with a man and she had been pointing a gun at this mom, black woman, and her daughter. Well, they've been identified and they've also been charged. Julian Wustenberg is her name. Julian Wustenberg. She's 32 and her husband is Eric Wustenberg. He's 42. And this happened over in Oakland County, Michigan. The pair have both been charged with felonious assault and it carries a maximum penalty of 4 years. Eric Wustenberg also used to past tense work at the Oakland University in Michigan. He was a coordinator of Veterans Support Services. And so once the video went viral and they saw the way that the pair conducted themselves, Mr. Westenberg is now no longer the coordinator of Veterans Support Services over at Oakland University in Michigan, and he was fired. So for their trouble, they are both now facing felony charges. And then, Central Park Amy, she is also facing some legal jeopardy now. She too has been charged. Amy Cooper is the lady who called the police on the black man who was sitting in the park watching birds, and she pretended like he was threatening her, and she called 911. Well, now Amy Cooper has been charged with filing a false police report. She too has lost her job, allegedly her home, and according to her public life. And so, ooh, boo-hoo, poor little Amy. This might make Amy and Peppermint Patty and Barbecue Betty and everybody else who wants to use police and abuse 911 by reporting things that are not true. So we'll see what happens with young Amy, and I'll keep you posted. And so now it's been a while, but it's time for Did You Know? And so in the midst of this whole COVID thing, cities and states opening up, cities and states closing, it's hard to keep track. My head is hurting trying to, brace myself from the whiplash. But I wanted you to know, at least for those of you who are here in California, that there are starting to be citations issued for folks who are entering certain places without masks. Most businesses will have a sign on the door that says you got to have a mask if you want to come in. But I can tell you specifically in West Hollywood, California, the first offense of being out without a face mask is a $300 fine. That's the first offense. And so you understand that it's going to progressively increase. In Santa Monica, California, the first offense of being caught out without a mask is $100. And then by the time you get to your third offense, you're looking at a fine of $500. And in Monterey, California, first offense of being out without a mask in the midst of this COVID pandemic, the fine will be $100. And by the time you get to your third offense, you're looking at a $300 fine. So family, listen, it's not about you. It could be about your family members that are home that may have underlying conditions and be vulnerable. It's about your grandma, your uncle. Wear a mask. Wear a mask. That's it for now, family. Till next time, be good, be safe.
You have been listening to the Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is a television commentator, social justice advocate, and is also well known for her book, Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate, an autobiography of her 20-year career as a Black woman on the Los Angeles Police Department. The book details what she learned as an LAPD insider. Sergeant Dorsey can be contacted through her website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com, or via any of her social media sites like YouTube and Facebook. Take the time to subscribe to her YouTube channel and also subscribe to this podcast via major podcast networks like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and many others. The podcast is also available on wireless speaker systems like Alexa and Sonos.